Um, Welcome to the CR60 event about how to implement difficult change to strive and succeed, featuring Susan Vogel. Nancy is unable to attend today because of a crazy deadline. She has put me in charge of this little intro. Since you're all Creative Roundtable members, it's okay to skip the intro. She wanted me to talk about a couple upcoming events. First off, November 15th through December 15th, registration is open for the next term. There will be a Black Friday sale, so watch out for emails and info on Slack. December 3rd is a CR60 of Anatomy of a Winning Proposal with Elise Benin. January 20th is Ways of Getting Ideas Rolling for Creative Projects with Jim Krause. February 15th is How to Win the Creative Entrepreneurial Game, featuring Michael Janda. March 1st is Getting More Dream Customers, featuring Kathleen Shannon of Braid Creative. And now a little bit about our presenter. Susan Vogel is a business consultant, strategist, and change facilitation coach. Her expertise lies in making difficult change simple for her clients. She is dedicated to helping individuals and businesses take control of their success, often by helping them get unstuck and out of their own way. She believes that the standard approach of focusing on process and systems alone to solve big problems is ineffective. Instead, she helps clients implement difficult change through their behaviors, how they do their jobs, how they think, how they respond, and how they adapt. She applies knowledge of brain science behind changing behaviors in a problematic way for her clients. All right, now I'll hand it over to Susan. Take it away.
Thank you, Emma. Good job. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar workshop, which the shortened version is to get unstuck and get it done. So we're going to talk about change and how we can implement it. Why do we need to do that? Well, we've all been through a time period where there's been a ton of change, right? And so you may be here because you're still adapting and trying to figure out what to do during the COVID. During that time, there were a lot of balls in the air. And what I noticed as a consultant working with lots of different businesses, there were two approaches. They were very different. There was nothing in between. People either sort of cowered down, waiting for it to change, waiting for it to get back to normal. I don't want any of the balls to hit me in the head, right? Because there's lots of balls in the air. The other group was out there trying to catch the ball. And if they took that approach, they were quite successful. But that required them to make changes, which often can be very difficult. So the folks that are under the desk often were unable to make the changes required to make their business work during this time. But there's many other reasons why you might feel the need to change. So I'm curious, we have a small enough group. When you saw the title and you decided to sign up, does anybody want to volunteer and tell us why you're here, what kind of change you're thinking you might want to be making? And I can't see everybody, so Emma's going to watch for me. Anybody? Okay. Here's some typical things that I would hear. For example, if you're a business owner, did somebody raise a little hand? I can't see. No? Okay.
Oh, I was just going to say something.
Sure, Amy, go ahead.
Hi. I sometimes, in working for myself, want my own change, like my own evolution and maybe the services I provide. And I feel like sometimes I get stuck in that because I have clients that rely on me for certain things. So that keeps me in the same place. So it's like how to kind of promote myself when it's myself.
Okay. That's a very common one. And as an entrepreneur, I think a lot of you have your own businesses. There's a life cycle that requires change. So for example, you start with just yourself, right? I'm a solopreneur and I'm out there doing my thing and I'm wearing all the hats, right? As I grow, perhaps I start adding some people, but now I have to give up control. I have to learn to delegate. I need to set boundaries and expectations. That's a very different skill set and way of thinking. So we have to let go of some things, the way we do things, and learn some new ones. Now our business maybe gets bigger. Now we've got a lot more people. And maybe we need to work on the business, not in it, and fully give up control of the day-to-day operations and just be very strategic with a growth mindset. Again, that's different thinking, different behaviors, different habits than when we started. The same thing can happen as an employee, right? We start as the individual contributor, and maybe we want to take on some leadership duties. I've never done that before. There's skills I don't have or ways of thinking that I need to change in order to be successful. So there's all kinds of reasons for needing to change. And sometimes it's just one or two things that are getting in our way to do things like provide new services, go into a different market, even raise our prices or structure things differently. If we don't have the ability to make that shift, we can get stuck. So a key message as you listen to this is that where we have the most growth is when we pushed outside of that, right? When we pushed ourselves to poke holes in our box, to get out of our box, bust down the sides, whatever analogy you want to use. But if we stay in our comfort zone, we don't grow. We can't build our business. We can't make more money. If we do the same things the same way forever, we're going to be in that place, which may be fine, right? That's maybe what some people want to do. But if you're looking to continually grow or challenge yourself, you have to get outside of your comfort zone. And that's the theme throughout this that hopefully you'll see. There's a reason that Darwin knew a lot about evolution. This quote speaks for itself. I will let you quickly read that. So key here is that we need to recognize what we need to change and where we're trying to go with our businesses, with our personal lives. So true story. A lot of people have tried to figure out what makes people successful. What is that characteristic or characteristics? And so a study was done where they took two business owners who were in the same field. They were of similar age. They happened to both be women. They came from a similar geographical location, had access to similar resources, education experiences, capital, employees. They looked at every aspect of their businesses. They also assessed them for IQ, EQ. These two folks were just about identical on paper, except for one emotional intelligence type of skill. One of the women had a high level of self-awareness, and she grew her business to $1 billion. The other woman scored very low on self-awareness, and she was filing for bankruptcy. One of the key impetuses, I can't just say the word, for change is self-awareness. And this is how I define it. The key here that's a little different than the dictionary definition is the part about not beating yourself up. When we can objectively look at how we're doing things, how we react with people, how we communicate, take in the feedback if someone tells us maybe we're not a good listener or we're not good at a certain skill set, we can then make the needed changes to continue to grow and have success. So the very successful woman did this constantly. She practiced self-awareness very objectively. So she would learn a skill that she didn't know. She'd bring in a coach. Maybe she hired somebody that was smarter than her in that area, but did it with confidence and without fear that she would somehow look inferior to this other person that she hired. So there's lots of different ways to address it. But the key is you first have to be honest with yourself about what you're good at and where you're struggling. So some signs that you can look for to see whether or not you need to make some of these deeper changes are behaviors that are telling you something at some deep level. I get a lot of people that come to me saying they're stuck. Or as we're peeling things back, there are certain things that they are clearly avoiding doing. Maybe it's a hard conversation. Maybe it's addressing an employee who's a bully. And sometimes it's a lot of justification, or everybody else has to change, or, it's somebody else's fault. So these are behaviors that you want to pay attention to. And if it's something that's been going on for longer than 6 months, it's probably something that's pretty stuck that needs some addressing. So what we know from science, and everything I talk about, by the way, is based on the neuroscience of change and actual research, is that if we're capable of making a change, learning a new skill, adopting a new habit, and we give it a good effort, we'll do it within 6 months. But if we've had the same things on our list, if we've been hitting our head against the same wall for 6 months or longer, we're stuck, we're blocked, we're missing a skill set. So that's one thing you can look at for yourself in this self-awareness exercise. Another thing is to see what you might be missing. So maybe some of you live with somebody that leaves their socks in the middle of the floor, or maybe you do, and keep walking over them, around them. And somebody says, would you pick up your socks? And the person who left them there says, what socks? This happens all the time. We get so used to something being a certain way, even if it's maladaptive, that we just work around it. And somebody from the outside comes in and looks and says, why the heck are you guys walking around the socks? The same thing happens with businesses all the time. And this can happen to any experience level of person. I've come into businesses with CEOs with 30 years of experience, and they are blind to these glaring issues that they decided to try to avoid. So again, one of the things we can do for ourselves is start to pay attention to see what's in front of us, to really listen when we get feedback instead of pushing something back and saying, they don't know what they're talking about. Gee, is there a kernel of truth in that? So that's another form of self-awareness that we can make. And then a third is to pay attention to whether you're the victim of or whether you experience an amygdala hijack. A lot of people might know what that is. It's used a lot. Some people call it lizard brain. But essentially what we're talking about is there's a part in our brain called the amygdala that processes emotions. Really important. It's also where the fight, flight, or fear response lies. So when our amygdala gets too fired up, there's too much input, there's too much happening, stress, whatever, that kicks in and we go hide under the desk like the guy at the beginning slide, right? Maybe we freeze or shut down, or we become argumentative or reactive. That's problematic in and of itself, right? Because those behaviors are difficult for others to be around. But the even bigger issue is when our hair is on fire, right? When the amygdala is fired up, the evolution of our brains has made it that that's the only part that's working because it was about saving ourselves. The problem is we cannot access the other parts of our brain when this is happening. So you could be a terrific problem solver. Maybe you're very good at planning and understanding how to get from point A to point B, and you're normally a very effective communicator. If we let ourselves get into this state, if we don't recognize it and we don't learn the skills to regulate our emotions, we're not using these other skills. And it can get confusing because people could say to us, you're so disorganized, you need to learn how to plan, right? Or you never get to the root cause of problems. Yet you have those skills, so it's confusing. So often it's another issue, like letting ourselves get overwhelmed, that's keeping us from using our other skills to help ourselves in our business or our career. So this is another thing we can sort of self-diagnose or look for. So you're probably thinking about all this stuff saying, oh my God, this stuff is hard to do. Change is difficult, and that may be why you're here. So imagine for a minute that you're sitting in a kindergarten class and the teacher is trying to teach you all about colors. And she wants every child to have a similar understanding of what red is, what green is. So maybe she picks up a red crayon and she writes out R-E-D and you trace those letters. And then you take the red crayon and you color a tulip. Same thing with green. Here's how green is spelled. Green is the color of leaves and grass. And so now everybody has the same understanding of what she's talking about, right? Well, not if one of the kids is colorblind. If the child is colorblind, they're going to be confused because everything to them is brown. And so they do not have the same understanding. They cannot follow the conversation, and they are confused. So imagine that instead of a color, we're talking about a behavior, a way of thinking or doing things. And people are saying to you, you need to be more red in your sales presentations. You need to be more green when you're negotiating your terms with your clients. If that is a skill you're missing and you don't really understand what it looks like, it's going to be like the poor little kid that's colorblind. You know, you're going to hear the words, but you have no idea how to execute against it. And this can often be why things are difficult to change. This can be why somebody's doing the same thing for 6 months, because you can tell somebody all day long, be adaptive. You need to be more flexible to survive right now. You need to be more empathetic with your clients. You know, I can look those words up and understand the definition, but that doesn't mean I know how to be adaptable or be empathetic. And so understanding what's really happening with ourselves is partly why implementing these changes are difficult, and we have to dig deeper. So part of why we have a tough time with things is because we're wired to resist. So again, more science. The way I like to explain this is to think about one of our nor'easters. I'm not sure if everybody's from the East Coast. Maybe if you're in the Midwest, some other place, when you get tons of snow. You know, we get the 2 to 3 feet. I grew up in Wisconsin, same thing. You get the blowing winds, you can't see anything. So imagine though, I am working from home and I have to get to my mailbox. I have a long driveway. I go past some neighbors. So I trudge up the driveway through the snow, through the wind, can't see. I get my mail. I'm going to come back in the same footsteps because it's easier. Why would I tromp through 2 feet of snow again, right? The next day, the snow has stopped and I can see that my path was bad because I haven't been plowed yet. I was in the neighbors, I'm over here, I'm zigzagging all over the place. Cognitively, I can say, that's a bad path, just go straight up the driveway. But the easier way is in our footsteps. So our brain is similar. Every time we learn to do something a certain way or experience it a certain way, you know, maybe we're raised in a conflict avoidant house, or we're lucky enough to have a boss that's very empathetic and we get to experience and see these things. We lay down a neural pathway, just like footsteps in the snow. And so our brain has footsteps too. And the more times that we experience it or see it that way, the stronger those connections are. So if we've done something a very long time, a certain way, even when we recognize that's not working for us anymore, making that shift is difficult. And so there really is some science to it, and there's some steps that we need to take, but it can be done. But it's important to understand so we don't get frustrated with ourselves why this is happening. And there's the biological reason for it. We also know from science that even though we are all going to resist in some way, shape, or form, there's actually 5 predictable responses to the need to change. So listen to these and see if you can identify where you fall on the spectrum. So the first response is easy peasy. You want me to do my job differently tomorrow? No problem. If I say to myself, I'm never going to eat flour and sugar again, no problem. These folks have very plastic brains. That's what we refer to plasticity, is that ability to quickly forget about the old footsteps and lay down some new ones. This lucky group is a fairly small percentage of the population, about 7 to 10%. So this is easy for them. The next response is people that have the ability to make changes. So they have fairly plastic brains. They understand the process for themselves to develop a different thinking habit. However, they need to agree to it. They need to understand it. And they might often feel like, I don't need to do that. So for yourself, you might be looking for whether you shut down recommendations made, right? People have said to you, hey, if you want to get into that marketplace, you need to do A, B, C. And you'll be like, nah, I don't need to do that. But maybe you get to some point where you say, you know what, I think I do. You can, in fact, then execute on it. And this is 20 to 23% of the population. If you happen to have employees, these are the ones that need to understand the why, right? You need to explain to them why this is good for the business, how this will make their job easier. And once that's done, they will be able to cooperate. This next group is where many of us fall. We understand the need, we want to make the changes. These are the people that come to me and say, I know I'm in my own way. I've been saying I want to go get into this market. I know I need to develop referral partners. I know that means I need to consistently build relationships. It's been on my list for 2 years. I don't know what the heck is wrong with me, but I know it's me, right? So you understand and want to change. However, that biochemistry in our brain is tripping us up, right? It's the difficulty of wanting to keep going back to the old way. So there's ways of moving past this that we need to understand, and then it's no problem. That's about 35 to 40% of the population, and a fair number of us fall into that category. Now we start getting into the continuum of higher resistance. So the next group is going to say to you, the old way's fine. Or you may say, I've always done it this way. It works fine. There's no need to change. And not only do you not think you need to change, but your brain is also wired to be more resistant. So you're going to really like those footsteps. So this gets harder. It is not impossible. I work with these kinds of folks all the time. These kind of people may eventually get to a point where the motivation is high enough, the pain point is high enough that they overcome that. But this is about 20 to 23% of the population. And this next group becomes really tricky for yourselves or if you have employees, because these are the folks that will smile and say, sure, no problem. And then they'll be like, no way. If it's an individual, the way you recognize this is it's always about somebody else's problem. These are the folks, unfortunately, that will lose a business after 25, 30 years. You know, where the marketplace is changing and they're not going to, I'm not going to adapt. Maybe they paid for a consultant to tell them, here's how to save your business. Nope, not doing it. They might lose a relationship or their health. So fortunately, this is a small percentage of the population. And in the coaching world, we use the term uncoachable. That is not arbitrary and it's not meant to be negative. It's literally that we know the wiring is at that far end of the spectrum. All is not lost. There are ways for these folks to change if they'd like to. It requires a very different approach. But if they're motivated, we add accountability to it, and some of these people can in fact make changes. But fortunately, it's a small percentage of the population. So if you decide to practice this self-awareness, one of the things you want to look at for yourself is, how do I tend to respond to that need to adapt in some way, shape, or form? So the good news is that our brains are capable of change, and I alluded to this earlier. The last 12 years of neuroscience research has completely shifted the mentality on this. So the whole, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, was actually based on scientists believing that we stopped learning lots of new things and making big changes fairly young in life. And we now know that is not the case, but there are certain steps our brain needs to go through in order to make big changes. So I've worked with people in their 70s who want to craft a whole different third act that completely blow up the way they think and do things because they're motivated to do that. So that's the good news. So you're convinced that you need to change. You know there's good reasons for doing it for your business. You are understanding that you may be a little reticent and there might be some resistance, but you're ready to get started. So imagine you're ready to get started and you're getting in your car without having a destination. And you drive and drive and drive and drive until you run out of gas. And then you end up someplace you didn't want to be, and you're stuck and you have no gas. That's what happens when we don't have a plan and some objectives, right? So you have to think about what is it that you're trying to accomplish and what does it need to look like. So when you share, that I want to get some different kinds of clients, or I want to stop working with this group and start working with that. These are starting to outline where you're trying to get to, which is the very first step. And part of what you need while you're doing that is to think about, where might that resistance be? Where do I hit the wall? And start asking yourself some questions. Is there something common about the situations that I avoid? Am I normally patient, but in these sorts of situations, I get overwhelmed and I snap at people? You want to start poking holes to see what kinds of things might make this more difficult for you that you need to push through. One of the things that's important to consider when you're doing this, and this is my philosophy in general, is don't bring a fly swatter when you really need a pooper scooper. Much of what we do is swatting at flies. People come with a list of 3 and 4 pages of bullets of here's all the things I need to work on, all my goals, all these things. And what we're really swatting at is symptoms, surface level stuff. And so we could swat all day long, but if we don't find the poop, right, that the flies are swatting around, we're never going to be, we're never going to solve it. So we need to do the same thing as it relates to change and setting goals, is we have to keep peeling it back and understanding what's the commonality in all these areas that I'm having difficulty in, so that I'm honed in on the right objectives. So to illustrate this, imagine that you have the sniffles and a cough and maybe a sore throat. And I made this slide way before COVID. I want to know if it's a cold, because if it's a cold, I might be just fine with chicken soup, right? But if I get a test and it's the flu, maybe the chicken soup isn't enough, and the way to get rid of all those symptoms is with Tamiflu. Or, maybe it's something more serious. I was thinking pneumonia at the time, right? COVID, that's a different root cause and therefore a different approach. So it's really important for you to do the same thing for yourself and your business, right? Get beyond the sniffles and the cough and the sore throat. Look at what's happening that you actually have to change and make some goals around. So let's look at how we need to set goals. This is the beginning of filling in the footsteps with snow so that you have a blank canvas that you can now start doing things differently. There's things that we need to set that are important goals, and there's other goals that I call outrageously important goals. They're both things you need to do for yourself, but they have different purposes. So an important goal is significant. Maybe this is how much revenue, how many new clients you want to bring in, how many new people I have to hire. This is maybe even a behavioral goal around, setting certain business hours, or, making sure I have a contract that outlines my expectations with my clients. All super important stuff, right, for our success. However, if there's things keeping us from doing those things, we need the outrageously important goal. So this is the getting at the root of it, right? So if my goal is to grow my business by 20% by entering into a new market, going back to my other example, and that requires new strategic referral partnerships, and that means I need to go to networking events every month, and I need to do certain activities with that. And the idea of that, makes my head spin. There's a goal around that, right? Addressing why can I not execute on that? That if I don't achieve that first, I'm never going to achieve everything else I'm trying to get done. So some things you can ask yourself to help identify that outrageously important goal is around, what do I need to learn to do differently, right? Do I not know how to negotiate with somebody that's a good negotiator? Do I have difficulty giving feedback? Am I conflict avoidant and therefore do not have the conversations with people that I need to have? You also might want to look at things you need to stop doing. Doesn't mean that they were bad, they just may not work for you anymore. So for example, if you start as a solopreneur and you're doing everything and controlling everything, and you now have employees, you have to give up control. You need to be able to be okay with feeding it to somebody else and know that you'll be going to be fine and you can just let them be, because if you keep jumping in and telling them how to do it, they're probably not going to be happy. So these are the kinds of questions you're asking yourself about, what do I need to change? And again, what might get in my way? So if I know that I tend to, get defensive when somebody gives me feedback, or that I cave every time a customer crosses a boundary I've tried to set, that's what we want to set a goal around. We're talking about behaviors, right? So the other thing about outrageously important goals is that we are honing in on behavior. We're not talking about revenue numbers here, right? Or tasks, or even strategies. We're talking about how we do things, how we think, how we interact. This is just a few examples of the many, many things that we need to pay attention to hone in on what's at the root of things and where do I need to make the change. These highlighted behaviors are ones that a lot of people found they needed to tap into during COVID, for example, to make changes. But it works with any of these. Each one of these, though, has other components. And so sometimes, like I said earlier, if we don't know exactly what this thing means, we have to dig a little deeper. Or we think that we're fairly flexible, but yet we don't seem to be making decisions that show us that we're flexible. The reason for that is that there's often even further behaviors underneath all these. There's pillars. So when the researchers look at this and they look at all the people that score very high in adaptability, for example, there's actually 4 core behaviors underneath that are important. If we're missing just one of them, this might be hard. So for example, people that score high in adaptability also have a high level of self-control. That means that they can understand their emotions, they can maintain them, not stuff them, right? But they process them, they decide what to do with it, they never lose control. Another key factor is being fearless, right? So think about that, right? In order to pivot quickly, do things differently, very quickly, you have to be fearless, because if you're afraid, you're not going to take the chance. And sometimes we have to try things in order to find out if they actually work. My clicker's not working. Another key behavior of adaptability is integrity. In other words, I have to be making sure that I'm operating at a certain level. And in this case, that I'm taking care of people, that I'm paying attention to what is going to keep people safe, or, I'm following laws. If I'm a lawyer, that I'm following the law. So integrity is important as well. And finally, people that are highly adaptable are also good at creating fellowship. One does not need to be a manager or supervisor to create fellowship. A team member can do that. But what that means is that you've set direction, strategy, you're communicating with folks, it's clear what they need to do so that they literally can follow you in the strategies that you're trying to implement. And adaptability needs that. So real quickly, looking at some of these other ones, what you'll find is a lot of times there's overlap. And so if in this example, you've identified that I really need to be adaptable, flexible, and creative, I can see where there's some overlap here. Self-control is here again, right? Trusting myself is part of integrity. So you have to dig deep sometimes and get some feedback to start to understand what's the little thing that's getting in my way. What's that one piece that I'm missing? Here's creativity. There's fearlessness again. You all are the creatives roundtable. You have to be able to try new things, right? You have to put out multiple designs, and you can't be afraid that somebody's not going to like one of them when you're trying to push the boundary. So this probably makes a lot of sense to you. So now you've started to identify what these outrageously important goals need to look like, right? You've been paying attention for yourself. There's a very specific way that we craft these goals. And again, this is based on neuroscience, so that it's in the part of our brain that allows us to start pushing through the resistance and making the changes. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to visualize the new behaviors, literally, like you're looking through a camera. This is to give us some distance, and it makes it much easier for us to understand what it looks like now and to be specific about what it looks like in the future. So you can even close your eyes while you do this, but this is a very effective technique. Now that you're watching yourself through that camera as you're interacting with clients or you're working with your employees, whatever that activity that you want to get better at is that trips you up, you then also want to start to describe it vividly. So if you're looking through the camera and your objective is to be more confident in all your interactions and to lead meetings a very specific way and to interact with customers a very specific way, you write that down. You know, when I walk into a meeting, I'm going to greet everyone. I'm going to give them a firm handshake. I'm going to sit at the head of the table because I'm the one leading the meeting. So however you want that to look, you start to really identify that very specifically. And finally, when you go to craft that goal, you're going to write it down. And I do mean write it like with pen and paper. This is important. We all like to type now, but that goes into a different part of our brain. So when we write it down on a piece of paper with our hand, it goes into our long-term memory and the place that we can access it to start to make these changes. So this is important. So this has been a lot of theory. Let's do a couple real life examples. These are all actual clients. So this particular client was a designer, and they had clients calling them at all hours, you know, 9 o'clock Friday night during movie night, over the weekend, you know, texting, emailing, and then if she didn't respond right away, they would be upset. And so as she's doing her goals, the important goals, right, were to establish some boundaries, to communicate them, and to honor them herself as well, okay? So that's all well and good. And if there's nothing in your way, these goals are fabulous. But let's say that she's been thinking about this for years and talking about it, but never did it. What kinds of things might get in the way? What might that big, outrageously important goal have to do with? Anybody want to give it a shot? Unmute.
Maybe if she can't say no.
Go ahead.
If she doesn't know how to say no to people.
Yep, that could be it. Marty, did you have something? You're unmuted.
Yeah, I think just wanting to be liked and not being aware of her real need to be liked. And so thinking, okay, do I need my clients to be my friends, or is there another strategy for having friends?
Yeah, huge, by the way. That I run into that a lot, or just overvaluing external feedback, period, and caring too much about what everybody else thinks versus ourselves. That's a good one.
Lydia
Any
also
other
said,
thoughts?
Lydia also wrote in fear of losing a client.
Yes. There you go. Look at, there it is. This is actually what it came down to. So what was going to get in her way was the lack of confidence, right? She was able to identify that. She did fear losing a client. If I don't take the call Friday night at 9 o'clock, they're going to fire me. And it was huge. And then finally, for this particular person, was avoidance about uncomfortable conversations. So in order to communicate a boundary, you have to create a moment with their client, right? To say, listen, I'd love to work with you, but here's how I work. If that's not how you want to work, I understand you can go with somebody else, right? But this is how I work. That takes a certain skill set, right? And if we don't like those moments of discomfort, we're not going to do this. Okay, so she needs an outrageously important goal to adjust this, right? So these things are then turned into the goal. I'll let you guys read this all on your own. You see the language you use is very deliberate. So instead of being sort of in that negative, oh my God, this is what I'm doing, this is the vision. In the future, I'm going to see myself confidently setting those boundaries. I will do this. I will do this. And you're creating that vision of knowing when you've succeeded, right? Because I'm no longer worrying about losing folks. Setting a goal this way really starts to change the way we're thinking and starts those new pathways of how we think. Now, in all honesty, I have to tell you that some people need help with this, right? This is the first step with my work with folks. But there are folks that can make those changes, those more flexible people we talked about, that this alone, off they go. Because it's honing in on it. Like, I finally understand what I'm doing and what I'm afraid of. We'll do another one. How are we doing on time? Okay, good. This is another client, and somebody alluded to this a little bit. So they were very experienced, decades in the field, known across the state. This happens to be a lawyer, that had the ability to provide services that went far and beyond what people typically did, and had a lot of experiences with very emotionally driven cases, difficult situations with families. And she was just doing this work basically for free. So she knew she wanted to implement a price increase. She wanted to improve her profitability because she was doing way too many things for free, and start to only take on the ideal clients. So many of you may have had thoughts about this whole firing of clients and saying no that can be so difficult. It's a common goal that I see where people feel they have to take everybody, because how would I turn down money? But often when we're not working with ideal clients, it does impact our efficiency, our productivity, and our profitability. Okay, what might get in the way of these kind of goals? Anybody want to take a crack at it?
I think with someone like this that's helping people, like the being too high that you're not able to help someone that's in need.
Yep, for sure. Any others? Okay, so for this particular individual, and it could be different for different people, by the way, I can have 5 clients with similar goals, right? About, I want to implement a price increase. They could have 5 different things that are in their way and need a completely different goal. So this is very individual, and why you have to go through these exercises for yourself. In this case, she was definitely undervaluing her experience. She was considered one of the top disability lawyers in the state. They would have her come and teach at the Capitol, yet she did not see herself as an expert. She would get so emotionally engaged with clients, again, because she was dealing with disabilities and seniors and difficult situations, that she would just do stuff for them. It's exactly the point you made, right, around I need to help these people. And there was a lot of assuming versus asking. In other words, how could they not want me to do this extra bit that I know how to do? Instead of saying, we can go at it this way, or I can also do this additional piece from you because I have the expertise to do that. So once these were identified, here was her outrageously important goal. Quickly looking at the chat because I just realized there's a bunch of stuff in here.
We did have one question from Marty that you can maybe touch on the end about setting a goal based on a feeling rather than a result.
Yes.
I was concerned about the previous example because in that regard.
Yep. And often we do have to have a set of goal around that. Yes, absolutely. And it may be that I will no longer make decisions based on fear, or I'm not going to worry so much about what other people think about me. And setting the goal starts the process because we are realizing that's what's happening. Because not everybody knows right off the bat. It's a discovery process.
I hear a difference between I will no longer make a decision based on the fear. I hear a difference between that and I will no longer worry about what people think. So they seem like two very
They
different.
are. They are. Yes. Thank you. And thank you for helping me clarify that. Yes, those could be very two different things. Or one person could have both of those problems, right? And they are two different goals. I have another like soup to nuts client example, but I see that we're at 117. So I don't know how much time we want to leave for questions. I can go through a more practical example, or we can just start having a conversation. Thoughts?
I'd like to hear it.
you-
Yeah, let's hear that one.
Okay. Okay. All right, here we go. I'll try to do it quickly. So this is an actual client, and this shows how the pragmatic piece of the implementation goes. So this is a vet hospital for cats. And I've been working with her before COVID, right? So there's some certain things that we had already worked on that ended up being highly important as it relates to adapting. And when COVID hit, because that's considered to be an essential service. And so when she looked around to see what others were doing, there was a lot of fear. Some other offices closed down, but she wanted to continue to provide care while being safe for her clients, herself, because she was a cancer survivor, and her employees. She also wanted to do it differently and have it be more upbeat. So if you go back, this is going to require adaptability, right? So it so happens that she and I had already done some work together, and we had already looked to find that there was some issues around fearlessness. And this will get to some of your questions, Marty. Specifically, she needed to make choices that weren't based on what others thought about her. That was in fact what it turned out was happening. Literally, she would think that people would leave her. She wouldn't take vacation because if the relief vet was better than me, they're going to leave me. Like, this was her constant circle. The other thing was around living in fear of rejection and failure and letting it impact the business. So there's those decisions, right? Around, do I hire people? Do I take a vacation? You know, do I let my vet techs do certain things? So again, in all honesty, we had worked on these things ahead of time and overcome them where the fear was now in check, and that she was way more balanced about being checked in with what's important to her, what's her inner core, and not worrying so much about what other people think. So she had already started to make really good choices for the practice about who she worked with, who she hired, the kind of clients that she wanted to work with. But this became super important when COVID hit, because now you have choices to make on what do you want to do in the circumstance, what feels right to you. If she was worrying about what everybody else thought or what other vets thought or whatever, she would have been paralyzed. So instead, she decided, I'm going to stay open. I'm going to prioritize safety for everyone. And we're going to think through this in the way that we can best serve the most people, realizing it won't be for everybody. So there was a process of where we would have the cats brought in and out, and here's where you can watch. And it was all documented with pictures. Whereas other vets were putting up these kind of, black and white signs on the door with all the rules. Everything was done in an upbeat, positive way. You know, we're here for you, we're safe. Here's a picture of how we do this. For example, here's where you're going to drop your kitty off, right? Because owners said, we really, don't want to walk away from them, right? So it's like they dropped the kitty, they stepped back, somebody picked it up. People could see what it was going to look like. Every aspect was looked at, and again, with fearlessness. So had we not addressed these things, I think we would have had a very different outcome, as did she. The messaging that we put out there was bolder. Before she didn't want to market a lot. In this case, she was now comfortable putting out there, here's how we're going to treat your cat. Here's how we're going to work during this. Here's how we're going to keep people safe. And really made a point of keeping that message upbeat out there. And we always looked for the areas of discomfort and adjusted, right? So if she had the little twinge, we knew where it was coming from and we could adjust the messaging and the strategy. So in the end, everyone was happy. The clients were ecstatic. The kiddies never lost a beat as far as their health. Her employees were delighted because they got to keep working in a safe environment, and she was wildly successful. Her business grew during the pandemic, whereas others did not. And if you look at the difference between before identifying all these important behaviors, so again, it started pre-pandemic. In the 4 years from identifying my outrageously important behaviors to implementing them through COVID, we've doubled her business in 4 years. It would not have happened had she not really worked hard at those self-limiting beliefs that were in her head to overcome them, because it would have tripped her up and she would not have been able to grow. So that's my quick and dirty client story. I'm happy to take some questions. Just to review real quickly with you guys. Understand that you're going to resist. This is hard. I call it difficult change for a reason. It's neurobiological. And so if you can understand that and push through it and embrace it, you can in fact make these changes. The goal setting process is really important. So you want to hone in on those behaviors. You want to visualize yourself doing them really vividly, and you're going to write it down. And when you're looking at these key behavioral shifts, we don't want 97 of them. Sometimes it's one thing you're doing, not more than 3 though. So you're looking for 1 to 3 shifts that you are going to address your root causes with, that will impact everything else that you are doing. I'm happy to take some questions now. If anybody thinks of things after the fact, or I'm happy to spend a half hour with anybody, just email me here at susan@sbvogel.com and put Creative Roundtable in the subject line, so I know that's where you came from. And I'm happy to answer questions. I cannot see everybody though.
Hi, Susan. Can you hear me? It's Vanessa Matthew.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi.
Now I can.
Okay. So my question would be, I wrote down for myself that I feel like I don't know what the boundaries need to be until I see examples of it. And I feel like that's why, even Lydia was like, the examples are helpful because I wasn't able to actually say much of anything until I saw examples, and I was like, oh, wow, okay. All these boundaries I do not have, all these boundaries I need. So what's your advice in terms of approaching boundaries when you don't know that you don't have the right ones in place?
Yeah, it can be a discovery process, right? And actually you can sometimes grab yourself an accountability coach. And that's when you start asking questions though. So sometimes they'll be like, think about when you're doing things that you're jazzed, you're happy, things are rolling. And then think about when you feel like the life's being sucked out of you. When are those things happening? And you start to kind of peel back like, oh, it's this kind of client, right? Or it's when I have to talk about pricing, or when it's time to give them my contract. To use that one, the one that was in there, what that decorator did is, first of all, she put all these things into the contract, right? And so to make it easier, after she'd had an exploratory call, she would give people that contract and she'd say, I need you to read it from front to back. You'll see that there are certain ways that I work. I'd like you to tell me if you're comfortable with them or not. If you're not, it's great, right? But that was the process that worked for her because she paid attention to when it was like, oh, right?
Yeah.
So some of it can be how you execute it and then also how you think about it. Does that help?
Yes, that helps. It kind of resonates with me at a book I was listening to. It was just like, pay attention to the feeling that you have.
Yes.
And let that be like a guiding light to like how you decide upon like where you focus your energy.
Yes. And a lot of times people aren't doing that right at the beginning, but it's like, maybe you pay attention to your body. Like I've been working with somebody that, he thinks his main problem is not being able to give presentations. And now that we've peeled it back, it's all about ways he's thinking about himself and where he feels safe, and that all these people have the ability to take his job away if he doesn't present to the board well. Presentation skills are not going to help him. That has nothing to do with it. But it's like, okay, pay attention to when does it start? And now that he's paying attention, he realizes it's a week ahead. like I start to feel like tight in my chest and I'm getting a little ornery. You know, the earlier we can start to hone in on, ooh, this is what's happening, and pay attention, that will help. So this is not like a one session deal. You know, you kind of have to give yourself some sessions to think about this, and then you sleep on it, and then you give it a little bit more. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much, Susan.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? I see a lot of faces of thinking. Libby, you look like you're really thinking. She's doing one of these.
I think this is just it's a hard topic to approach when it's like you do have to be introspective and reflective, and taking the time sometimes to do that, especially if you have any trauma in your background, then it's an issue. Like you hit a
you're
wall.
absolutely right. Yeah. And then, you know, and I'm not trying to be self-serving. If that's the case, then it does help to have somebody assist you, you know, because your patterns are deeper. So I'll get assessments back sometimes where, you know, and it's not like therapy, right? So sometimes people realize, oh, I just realized why I do that now, right? Because my parents, whatever. You know, sometimes the way we're brought up, you know, there's people of a certain generation that I coach frequently where they were brought up with a very strict religious background, and you don't talk about feelings and you don't cry in front of other people. And now they're trying to be a leader and they don't have any empathy or introspection. Not that they're not good people, but in their world, you didn't talk about when you were upset or whatever. Now that can be learned, right? So in this case, if what I'm trying to achieve is to be an effective leader, then I can go back and learn those skills still. And whether I know it's because how I was brought up or not makes no difference to my process. We talk about what do we want it to look like going forward.
Fabulous. I love it.
Any other questions? How's that for ending on time?
Perfect. Marty had asked about the slides. I don't know if Nancy, I think Nancy sends those out at the end in like a follow-up email.
I don't know that she does, but I'm happy to send them to you.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
So if you want them, just send me an email to my email, susan@sbvogel.com, and I'm happy to send them to you. Just keep them for yourself, please. That's my only.
Sure.
I know you guys all have your own intellectual property. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I wouldn't be competent to deploy them myself as a vendor. I just wanted them as a prompt.
Yes.
To, you know.
I understand. I understand. I'm happy to do that. Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies. It's all ladies from what I can tell in the pictures.
Thank you,
It's
Susan.
been a terrific audience, and I appreciate the opportunity.
That's great. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good rest of your day.
Nice to see everybody. Bye, you guys.
Bye-bye.